Hey, everybody, it's Lance Dawson. I am back with my amigo, Andrew Stewart. We have an amazing show today for you. I have been trying to have a conversation with this gentleman for a couple of years. It is Jeff Woods in the studio with us today. Jeff Woods, if you must know, is a famous DJ. He used to work in Toronto for, I believe, Q107. He has interviewed all rock royalty, including Bono and the Rolling Stones, et cetera, et cetera. And he is the host of Records and Rockstars podcast. It was a radio show at one point. It is now a super successful podcast, a continuation of him interviewing all these amazing musicians and entertainers. He also has the Blue Motel podcast. And as Andrew and I will tell you later, this guy has a mellifluous voice. And so he has decided to use his mellifluous voice to read erotic material. So while you are hanging out with your significant other, you might want to tune into the Blue Motel and listen to Jeff Woods read some pretty amazing stuff. Anyway, all that is to say, Jeff has a new book that's coming out, and it's Being Bi, and in the music industry that I always thought that would be actually more accepted in the arts community, but perhaps not. There's some challenges with that. And he's got this new book, which I am going to have to say both Andrew and I have read. It is incredibly interesting and smart and funny. And we've got him in the studio today. So as always, this episode is sponsored by Look Digital Marketing. And from stunning websites to full service digital marketing, they help your business shine online. See the difference with Look Digital Marketing? Look no further. Check out lookmarketing.ca. You can check them out today. Anyway, we've got Jeff Woods in the studio with us. Let's go. Well, you are an official member of the band, so.
Mr. Woods,
how are you?
Look at that guy.
Let me go turn the furnace off.
Okay. Oh, I need to turn down a fan.
Look at that.
Glad he said that. That fan would have been
his opening line. Let me go see if I can turn the furnace off. I mean, come on.
It's gonna get warm in here.
Yeah, I think
is what I just heard.
I'm questioning about whether Jeff's joining us on Backstage Lowdown. Is he here visiting us, or was that an opening line for the Blue Motel? I've got to go. I got to go and turn off the furnace.
True
I think I left something turned on at home, and she's about 5'5". And how you doing, Jeff? I
already feel uncomfortable.
You know what, man? I'll tell you, this is going to be a bumpy ride because I've been looking forward to talking to Jeff Woods for 2 years, and I'm so excited to have him here today. And Jeff, I was teasing Andrew. I said, man, I wish I was doing this at 6 a.m. It is the only way that I could match your mellifluous timbre in your voice. 6 a.m., baby. I could do it, but you're the man.
I did 6 to noon many years ago. It was early when you go to bed at 3.
Yeah, yes, it is. It is. But it's just nice to hear that voice. We were talking about you and our buddy Pete Fowler, and boy, there's no voices better, I think.
He's a good man. You're all good fellas. Thank you for this time that you're allowing me.
Not at all. We are super excited. I was just trying to record an intro for you and talking about, the book I was excited about, Radio Records and Rockstars. The guy we've got with us today is interesting on so many levels. I can't even start to name, but because we've got a brand new book, Being Bi, that is just another layer of interest. And so we're just super excited to have you. I appreciate you taking the time with us, Jeff.
It's good of you to say. I didn't expect to write this book, but January of this year, I don't know, I just woke up one morning and thought I better write this all down and get it out there. Not for me, although you do it for yourself, but it's not really for me. It's for all the people that I know are struggling with how they are, who they are, and the fact that they don't feel they can reveal who they are, particularly as I experienced this myself for some years, I would say decades, particularly to the people that are closest to you, your spouse, your wife, There's so many guys that are down low or discreet, as it were, that are
Yeah.
bi, and they're so afraid that they're going to lose the relationship that they're in if they come clean. But I figure it's inevitable. One day you have to be honest with somebody.
Yeah. You know what? And I think for anybody, whatever their identity that they're logging on to, um, for the most part, I've always said, look, I'd rather be lonely alone than lonely with someone else.
It's a great
And
point. Yeah.
well, and so I figure if you can't be true to your own identity with the person you're supposed to be closest to, the person that gets to see all the warts and everything else, where are you really? Um,
It's
but
true.
yeah, but anyway, but like I said, it's always coming from an area of privilege. Like if you're heterosexual, that's not a big thing in our, well, Ryan Reynolds notwithstanding, let's be honest. But anyway, um, not as much maybe as a big reveal. And I'll tell you this, I know people, well, no, Andrew, I'm wrong. We're now doing a YouTube series because I've described, remember I described, I said, Jeff's a good looking dude, got lots of tattoos. He rides mean ass, badass motorcycles. So whatever your preconceived notion of being bi, being gay, whatever your preconceived notion is, goes out the window with this guy. And so I think I was super excited to have you on, Jeff, and to explore. The book was really well written. I said that it was educational. I know that was one of your, things of writing it, to educate people, maybe whether they don't, if they're not bi, even they're just to educate them. But it was funny and it's smart. And I've always said that about your music interviews. I can't believe how well read you are. Like you do such deep dives on songs. It's incredible. But I really liked the book because it was equally, it's some funny spots to it, and you have to be smart to be funny. So I think you nailed that.
I credit my dad, who was a man of very few words, so he wouldn't have ever written a book, Lance and Andrew, but he did save line. He'd save lines for 9 years, and then out it would come because he knew it was in the perfect context of the conversation, and the whole room would light up
I
and
love
laugh.
that.
It's kind of great. It's a real
Yeah.
discipline to be able to save that line for when it's just right. And I don't always do that. I don't have that talent, but I don't know. You hang around. I really do believe this. You have a certain amount of intellect and IQ. Doesn't have to be over the top. But you do something for a long time. You stick with something for a long time. You can't help but become somewhat adept at it. I like what you said, though, Lance, and I'll take it as a compliment, as intended, about doing interviews of any kind, but particularly over the years as a music interviewer, an artist interviewer. The main way that I dig so deep into an artist's career is listening. It's just like really going back and hearing a song that's been around for 30 years. When I interviewed Bowie the first time, I went back and just listened to his 70s albums. I wanted to hear them with fresh ears in the sort of context that I was going to be speaking with him. And I started hearing them in a kind of a different way, so that when I sat down and spoke with them, I could approach them in the context of having just heard those records again yesterday. And I could tell he really liked that.
Yeah. But
You know?
I think it's even one step further. And by the way, you've brought up two different things I want to get back to. But I was listening to something the other day where you were talking about the most famous chord played on a 12-string guitar. And and so it wasn't just, hey, everybody, let's talk about A Hard Day's Night because we got this great chord. You cut over to Randy Bachman, who broke the chord down to say, okay, here's the chord on the 12 string. Then so and so's playing bass. He's playing a D bass note, and that, and then we got this sus chord over here. That's a different level of this is why this chord works, right? Because you
It's
could have
fun.
just said, this is the
Yeah.
most famous chord on a 12-string guitar. You guys ought to try it.
I like when
Oh,
people,
come on.
I mean, a credit to Randy Bachman, and thanks for pointing it out, but a credit to him for being he was almost childlike in the best possible sense. The innocence of a child going, wow, check this out. This is the coolest thing ever. That's how we listened to music when we were 12 and 13 and 14. Like it
Yeah.
was the coolest thing ever. And to you guys and me, it kind of still is. And to Randy Bachman in his 70s, he still found it fascinating. So I couldn't help but be caught up in his enthusiasm to share it with the world. So, and I don't worry sometimes about copyright infringement because you know that Randy Bachman's really going to be happy that I've
Yeah.
shared that with my audience.
Absolutely. Okay.
Right?
That was a tangent on my
Music.
obsession with Jeff's interviewing skills and why admittedly I've been a little nervous about today. You talked
Nah.
about your dad. You talked about your dad.
Mm-hmm.
And I love my dad. I had a really good dad. I was lucky to have a good dad, but he's not a perfect dad. And my parents had me when they were 40. So they were like 2 generations away from me. And we would have discussions that, who cares when you're 5 and 7 and whatever. But as I grew up and started to question things, then their preconceived notions and the way they were raised kind of came to a head and came out to me. And so I felt very fortunate growing up in that world to be straight because I don't think my dad was the kind of guy that would have been understanding of that. And I referenced that. I based this entire thing on because he never said, I will be honest with you, he never said one homophobic thing to in my presence his entire life, which was good. I was glad about that. But I grew up in Niagara Falls, Ontario. That's 80% Italian. A lot of my friends are Italian, and my dad took me to the same Italian barber my entire life. I had the worst haircut from the age of 7 to 15.
What was his name? Was it Giuseppe?
Yeah, it was. It could have been. No, I was like,
I
yeah, it was probably like Jim or something, right? But it was like, or Carlo. I think it was Carlo. So
I
it was
had
the
I had an
same guy.
Italian barber too. I get it, and
Right,
you assume certain things about the old world.
right.
Yeah.
But it was the worst. Haircut never changed.
Oh, there's
It
that.
never changed. So I'm 14, 15. I'm discovering girls. I'm discovering like my own music taste. I'm not just listening to what my parents brought to me. And I've got a paper route. So I got some cash in my pocket. And one day on my way home from high school, I decide I'm going to get a haircut. As a matter of fact, I'm going to get a hairstyle. And I pass one of these foofy type of salon fancy stuff. I'm like, all right, let's do it. And
Somebody's
I go
getting
in,
a head massage.
let's get whatever, right? I don't even know what I'm doing. And the guys, and this is like the 80s. So it's prep city kind of stuff. I walk out of there looking like somewhere between Flock of Seagulls and I don't know, name a prep meister, Alex P. Keaton. I come home and my dad lost it, like just lost it over this haircut because he thought it was feminine. And I was so disappointed. I was like, are you kidding? It's hair. It wasn't a face tattoo with no regrets. Like, seriously. And so these are the things. So I guess, Jeff, all this is to say, how was your dad with your lifestyle and et cetera, et cetera?
It's a great question. And I have to be honest, I don't think I was ready to write and release this book until he had passed. And he passed 3 years ago, November, 3 years ago. And so I waited 2 years. I wasn't ready to have that conversation with my father. With my mom, it was no problem. My mom had the facts of life, the birds and the bees talk with me when I was 12, 13 years old in the living room in the evening. I remember it like it was yesterday. And she was super cool, super liberal, super open. And you know what? Everything to your point about your dad, although he never said anything homophobic, you kind of always wondered probably where he stood on certain things. And my dad, to your point, he always said things like this: live and let live. Do unto others. Like simple but meaningful.
Right.
To me, the Bible can be summed up in 3 words: do unto others.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the golden rule, I guess.
And then somehow it contradicts itself a million times, or
of course,
interpretation
of
goes
course
on.
it does.
Do unto others, but let me tell you we're going to judge a few people along the way.
It's the rest of that book, or certainly the interpretation of that book by certain people. But shy of getting into a religious discussion, which I sort of do 90 times in the book, I don't think I was ready for my dad's actual words around the whole thing, because he would make jokes when we were young. He would make jokes about men that were effeminate.
Right.
And while I'm not an effeminate man as such, I remember seeing myself on television in the early 90s. I was doing a movie review for CTV in Edmonton. and I watched it back. They sent it to me, and I was shocked at how I looked to myself. I thought I looked incredibly effeminate, and I was a bit bothered by it, only a bit. And my girlfriend, who was about to be my wife at the time, she said, "No, you look cool. You look like you. You look great. I love you." And that's all it took, a little reassurance from somebody you care about. And I got over it. And now when I think I look effeminate, I think, gee, you don't look like that kid in Oshawa who couldn't put a sentence together. You look like you maybe have something to say. So
Right.
I don't know. Once you accept yourself, nothing else really matters. And I accepted myself before my dad died, but I guess not enough to write the book before he passed. And I know he'd be proud of me. I don't know
Good.
if you saw this in the book. Just a full circle moment here with your question. My dad shared with me a ton of photos from the first 20 years of the 1900s. His dad was born in 1900, his mom in 1901. And so there are photos in the teens and the 20s of my grandfather in a suit, typically. It looks like somewhere in the woods in Peaky Blinders, the TV show.
Right.
Nice.
Right.
I
Love that
love
show.
It's so good. It looks like that, the way they're dressed, the way they're, a bunch of guys hanging out. But here it is. And it was surprising to me. And his answer was excellent. I said, they're kind of like leaning into each other. It wasn't like guys hanging out after a hockey game, like hey, guys, like bros. It
Yeah.
was like it showed affection. So, in other words, there's a guy sitting on a log, and there's another guy kind of leaning into him, like they were gay, maybe.
They had a
But I don't
relationship.
think they. I said to my dad, "What's going on there?" And he goes, "It was the sort of the style of the time, and certainly the style of the photography at the time was to be directed by the photographer, who had all this camera gear and was obviously a professional. It wasn't like us going to getting a cheap throwaway camera and snapping pictures at your favorite concert. It was a well thought out, sort of choreographed, directed photo shoot, and the fact that they showed such affection for, otherwise heterosexual men who are married was surprising to me. And his response was that that was the way of the day. And I left it at that. But that
Right.
would have been a discussion that would have led into everything that I ended up writing about in the book. Again, I wasn't ready to have that talk with my dad.
Yeah. It's interesting with our roles with our dads, right? That's
It
cool.
is. Yeah. Well, and you
Andrew,
talk
yeah.
about another era, right? My
Yeah.
dad was born in the 30s.
Jeff brings up a good point. We were just saying about how homosexuality was actually in Canada illegal till 69, which it's really weird to me because I don't understand how you can legalize or criminalize sexuality unless I mean, of course, we were talking about like underage stuff. I get that. But
Well, yeah,
But
that's the baseline for me. If it's legal, let's start there. Legal
right,
and consensual. They're the two tenets of the whole thing, and I spell
right.
that out pretty clearly in the book. The most important C word, consent.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And I mean, gosh, when it wasn't that long ago that women couldn't vote, and this is where I tend to get my back up sometimes when you see younger people using the lens of today to judge the lens of yesterday. I just don't know if that's appropriate because we want to see some evolution. Um, I
And you need
don't.
context. You're right.
You need context. You need whatever. I have two sons that are 22 and 21, and we talk about that all the time. And they were raised in a very uh, I loving household, and I told them early on. I said, "Look, I don't know where you guys land on. I was born in the 1900s, and everything in my life was binary. You're straight or you're gay, and I didn't really care which. But now, like you bring up in the book, sexuality is very complex, and there's a sliding scale, and it's more fluid. And so this was a new concept to me, and one that I'm catching up on. Like, okay, got it. Right, it's fluid. Believe me, I identify as heterosexual, but I love pumpkin lattes. It's very confusing for me, and God damn it, I try to figure it out. Having me as a dad is very challenging for these boys. I will be
having you as
clear.
a friend is very
I
challenging.
know. I work at it every day. But no, I was honest with them and said, look, I've had friends my whole life that were gay, but we never, and it was just fine. But I'm going to admit there was a time in when I was in, I don't know, grade 7 or 8, like people use the word fag all the time. And it wasn't I don't know if it was derogatory at the time. It must have been, but now you wouldn't even think about using because it does hurt people and it does offend people.
Yeah,
But that was
it was derogatory. It just didn't feel derogatory unless you were gay or bi.
That's right. And half of
bi wasn't even a word. It wasn't even an identification then.
No, and you didn't know. And I think that was the other thing, because there must have been people in our company that we didn't know that we were hurting at that time.
Absolutely, constantly. Gay was the word, and bi and not even bi, but gay and fag, and then the other word, the one that the one that George Carlin spoke of, those hard consonants, those C's and K's.
Yeah.
Is this put up as an explicit?
Yeah, I'll put it.
Yeah,
explicit. So we're good.
Right. All of my podcasts are put up as explicit, just in case I want to say one bad word, so-called bad. But cocksucker and motherfucker. The C word was even more common in my public school than gay or fag. And everyone used those three words, it seemed. It wasn't everyone, but it was everyone I was hanging out with in the schoolyard. And I wasn't really that in touch with my sexuality at the age of 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And then puberty hit, and it slowly evolved. And the fluidity of it became apparent. And then I thought, there are still people from my past who I don't hang out with anymore that still talk that way. They haven't evolved. And it's kind of sad, but they're kind of stuck back there. And it's not my business to bring them ahead, but I did write a book that hopefully some of them will read and go, oh, there is a different way to look at this. And to your point earlier, if the motorbike riding tattooed rock radio guy with the deeper voice and no effeminacy, is that a word? No effeminacy?
Sure. It is now.
It is. Geez, if he's, then wait a minute. Maybe I have to rethink this.
Right.
There was a point in the book that you were talking about how it's important for people to actually take a step back from the crowd and not look at everybody just as a group as being gay, lesbian, bisexual.
Andrew, that's so good.
That you're looking at an individual. You're looking at a friend.
Important.
You're looking at a brother. You're looking at a sister. And you need to personalize it to understand there isn't anything wrong with this. This is a friend that I have loved for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
So the question then becomes, so I have a question then, because I feel like we all have that, right? Like if you're looking at your identity, Jeff's brought this up a few times about knowing who you are and how important that is to actually, growing up. And it's really important for the people in your lives too, because the more you know yourself, the better decisions you make, and the better decisions you make, the people around you and that are closest to you really benefit from that. So I agree with that. But when, Andrew, you brought up all that stuff, and it was in the book too. What do you see first? Like, I don't see somebody's sexuality first, right? You see the person, you see the love in their heart, that they're your sister, your brother, whatever, right? And so, what do you choose to see first about this person?
It's important. I mean, Carlos Santana was a good sort of example, because I asked him, unrelated to sexuality completely. I just said, how do you, because he collaborates with so many people, and I get the reality of working for a label or working with Clive Davis and working for Arista, and having people on your own label that you work with. That's an obvious. But outside of that, in a more general term, because Carlos Santana isn't going to work with somebody he doesn't want to work with just because they're on his label. I said, how do you choose with whom you work? And he said, I look for the open flowers. And that's such a mature, elder statesman of rock and roll kind of way to look at things. But I like the way he framed that, because if you're not ready to work with me, then why am I going to ask you to? If you look open. So I've said before, I lead with a smile. People say, in fact, a cousin of mine, when I was going to get this neck tattoo a couple of years ago, she's like, are you sure you want a neck tattoo? Isn't that a little limiting? Isn't that going to marginalize you further? And I said, well, I tend to lead with a smile. So if the smile's not going to cut it, they're not even going to want to know me with a neck tattoo, if that's their stance in the first place. I don't know, man. I take people at face value, and usually it comes from an apparent intention, an openness or a closedness. It's either an intention to communicate and talk and shake a hand or say hello, or it's not. And it goes back to what Carlos said, the open flowers, right? Not
Yeah.
everybody's ready to meet you where you are. And that's okay. We may circle around with these people again or not.
This concept of being ready keeps coming up. You weren't ready to write the book until last January, and I think that's interesting to me too, because when we talk about Bowie, and in the introduction, I think I was talking about a few of the people that you've talked to, and Bowie always fascinates me. Um, and I just thought like somehow he got a hall pass. Like no one really judged him poorly. Maybe because his talent was so undeniable. We
I
don't
think that's
care if
it.
he's Ziggy Stardust. We don't care if he's David Bowie. He can wear a dress. We're cool with whatever. That's a rock and roller kind of guy. But I felt like, how is it that only in the last 5 to 10 years, the acceptance of being bi, being gay, being whatever, has become normative? When you can cite a ton of different examples back in the 70s, saying, well, he was like just one step away from Kiss and their makeup. You know what I mean? Like, and they all got a hall pass,
I think
right?
you made a great point. They got a pass because they were so exemplary in terms of their artistry, and they if you got rid of all of the people that are legitimately gay or bi or outside the heteronormative structures that we've been, that we grew up with, you get rid of a lot of music. You might not even realize it. Well, the greatest example would be Freddie Mercury. Always got a pass, but then again, he wasn't openly, while he was visually clearly not hetero to most of us. He never talked about it. He said it's nobody's business but my own. And I like that kind of about him. I think that if he were around longer than the 90s, he probably would have come out as a spokesperson and played a role that was greater than being quiet about it. But the other one, Rob Halford, I mean, no one said a word. None of the bros that were going to Judas Priest concerts were talking about the fact that he's probably gay, with all that leather and the motorbike and the riding crop and the lyrics. But it was heavy metal. It was hard rock. It didn't really matter. And then he got a pass too, which was cool. When people did find out, they're like, whatever, we just like the songs, man,
Yeah. Do
which
you
is
think it
good.
was because they were, I guess this is going back to Bowie, but he was so close to the 60s of free love that the 70s were a little bit more forgiving?
And I think it comes down to the individuals, though, because let's face it, as much as you and me and our friends and our family and the people we choose to hang out with have been cool for a long time, and even some of the people that weren't quite cool have kind of crossed over to
Come around.
acceptance. For every one of us, there's a lot of people that aren't cool with it at all, and maybe they did come around to accepting gay. They're still not too sure about bi. They're definitely not sure about trans, and they're definitely not sure about drag queens. We're demonizing those groups way more than bisexual people, which is why I say being by the book is for everybody, hetero, bi, gay, everybody, because it talks a lot about the damage that people are doing to trans people because of their ignorance, because of their lack of understanding what's really going on with these people. The idea, here's the thing, the idea, and this is perpetuated by the far right, by certainly politicians that are trying to get elected or reelected, enter Donald Trump and the rest of them. The idea that somebody would want to transition from a, um, a man to a woman solely for the purpose of getting into a woman's bathroom to potentially have sex with a woman. I mean, this is the lowest form of intellect to make that leap, to have that assumption. No one's going through all of that. A lifetime of turmoil, inner conflict, figuring out who they are, coming out to themselves, coming out to their family, going through hormone replacement therapy, going potentially through surgery just to get into a bathroom. But the right wing people will have you believe that. The same people that are up in arms about trans people in general and up in arms about people that are doing drag, which has been going on for over 100 years now. So why are these people suddenly up in arms about this stuff? Either they're trying to further their political career
Yes.
and get people on their side with these ridiculous arguments, or methinks thou protest too much, which is another chapter in the book.
Yeah. You know, Jeff, I agree with you. That
Tell me.
that argument about the whole, doing all this stuff to get into women's change rooms and stuff. It's like, look, I get it. Men are let's all three of us cop right now. Men are very sexually motivated. Okay. I don't know one man that has the capability to play that kind of long game. Not one. They can't think that far in advance. There's not one guy I know. Gay,
That's
straight,
incredible.
bi.
I've got about a 2.5 hour limit, and that's it. I'm not going through all that.
Yeah,
I'm a lead singer in a band. That's it. That's my sweat equity. That's my long game.
If that doesn't pick up, then nothing will.
I'm this close to a neck tattoo. Okay, so that's the long game. Okay, here's the challenge, because I don't want to make it too easy on you, because I did love the book, and I think if we Venn diagram where we're at, there's a huge overlap. A couple of challenges I've struggled with. First of all, if you think about somebody that feels trapped in the wrong body, that I can't even imagine how psychologically tough that is. I can't. I think and I don't want to speak for the incredible, like the very, very right, because I consider myself more of a moderate. Like anybody that's moderate in their thinking, that's fine. The country leans left, country leans right, but the country doesn't go off the rails because it's all, moderate thinking. And we could have a civil conversation because we're both moderate, civilized people. It's the extremes on both sides that throw it out of skew. And I think the nice thing about being by the book doesn't jam anything down anyone's throat. Yes, make a joke, whatever. I'm just saying it doesn't. It's an educational book. You can read this. It's funny. There's non-judgment about it. If there's any judgment, it's about people that stand in judgment of other people. And let's face it, I don't mean to diminish people's sexuality, but never has there been an issue that affects people's day-to-day lives less. Jeff comes out as being bi. Does my life change? No. I still want to have coffee with this guy. He's an interesting dude. So I don't understand where people kind of get all up in arms, as to your point, about something that affects their life in no way, other than to say, hey, somebody else is happy today. Somebody else in the world is happy. That's fine. The thing I struggled with is that, statistically speaking, I can't imagine there's a mass amount of trans people, just from a genetically, statistically proportionate amount. But I feel like all of a sudden they had like 90% of the microphone, and that they may deserve that because for so long they've lived in, captivity, so to speak. But I think the far right, they digest things very slowly, right? You have to introduce pablum to them very slowly because, so does that make sense, Jeff? Or am I being judgmental?
I think that you're right. The microphone has gotten louder, and the broadcast channel has gotten greater in the conversation around drag queens, which was perpetuated, brought forward, and perpetuated largely by the people that opposed it, not by the people themselves. Drag queens were quietly living their lives as entertainers. Right. Not only on Church Street, but in libraries more recently. And the joke is hashtag not a drag queen often. And when that usually is a response to is another white clergyman or somehow politician or somehow figure of authority, be it a Boy Scout leader in America or a religious leader or some sort of right-wing anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ, anti-trans, anti-drag queen person getting busted for something untoward, something criminal, something sexual. Having sex with minors is in the news every other day, and it's not just Catholic priests. It's oftentimes Mr. Brown down the street who's been waving the flag for anti-something or other. So hashtag not a drag queen. Yet again, not a drag queen who perpetuated some criminal act. Yes, they were dressed like a woman and reading stories at the local library. I think that every situation has to be looked at individually. If they were half dressed and reading erotic stories to 6-year-olds, that's one thing, but they're usually not. They're usually out as entertaining drag queens, reading any book that is allowable within the system.
Yeah. Jeff, can I interrupt you for a second? Because
yeah, you totally can.
You've made a good point.
Tell
because
me.
I really want to bring this out,
Yeah.
to our 11 listeners. It's really important because Jeff really brings up some interesting things about preconceived notions about people that are bi. They can't be monogamous. They can't be this. They're this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've always corrected people and on is that I hate the fact that there's a percentage of people out there that somehow connect pedophilia with being gay.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Like when you brought that up to the library, like to 6-year-olds, that bothers me. These are not, do you know what I mean? Pedophilia is a subsection, a very small subsection that takes advantage of young children. And I believe that should be criminal. But it bothers me that they connect, because the gay community, the bi community, all that has nothing to do with it.
No. It's so great. We
so I'm sorry to interrupt, but you brought that up.
I'm glad you always interrupt me. It's your show. But conflating, that is putting together, that is combining this with this when they have no real correlation. Conflating gender identity with sexual preference is one of the things. Just because you identify as a woman and were formerly a man or vice versa, doesn't mean you have a sexual preference that correlates to people's assumptions. That's number one. And the other thing, conflating pedophilia with being trans or being anything, conflating it with anyone. The criminal act of pedophilia is by people who do that act. It's not specific to trans. It's not specific to. It's most often, if you go statistically in North America, it's most often not the people that are being demonized for being the people that are assumed to be the people. It's usually middle-aged white men. It really is. And it's oftentimes the ones that are protesting the most, the ones that are either religious rights or the ones that have access. Access is a huge one, which is why the Boy Scout documentary is not only revealing but a bit shocking. These people with access and with authority, and the whole thing almost came tumbling down. None of them were trans. None of them were drag queens. None of them identified as bisexual or gay. Yeah, they were good old white boys, hetero.
Yeah. Well, the other part to your example is that I think should be celebrated is not somebody shouldn't be demonized for wearing a dress in the library. They should be celebrated because they're in the library reading a freaking book.
I've spent a lot of time over the years. Back when I worked for Columbia and Epic Records, we would do releases on Sony for Mariah Carey or for Barbra Streisand or for Celine Dion, and these were prime artists that drag queens would perform to. Right, the drama of Celine Dion or Barbra Streisand. So we'd go to Woody's on Church Street, and we'd do record release parties through HMV or through Sam the Record Man, and we'd have drag queens perform these new songs from these artists, and it was a lot of fun. It was always really good times, and there was nothing untoward or nothing but fun about it. It was celebrating music by people who were entertaining, and that's all it really is. Ever.
Jeff, we're gonna. I knew that we were gonna have this problem. I was gonna have I need Jeff Woods part 1, 2, and 3 because we get down these tangents. And we're always talking about other people. So, Jeff, I want to bring it back to you. Since you've, I guess, come out on Toronto Mike, or since you've written the book, has there been what's been the reaction? Has it been mostly favorable? Has it been, I mean, I follow you on Facebook. I haven't seen, I don't think I've seen a negative comment yet. But have you noticed, has it been favorable? Have people celebrated this about you, or have you noticed some backlash?
There's been no backlash. It's incredible. I'm
That's
sure that behind
fantastic.
closed doors, thank you for asking. Behind closed doors, I bet there's been the odd person that's like, oh, do we really need to hear about it? But these would be some of the same people that are like, well, we're going to have a hetero parade. Have a hetero parade. If people show up, good for you. Why do they have to? And you said it earlier, but you said it in a nice context. Why do they have to shove it down our throats? Why do they have to keep talking about it? Here's why they have to keep talking about it. Because in several dozen, and that's not a typo, in several dozen countries in the world, um, it's not just demonized. It's not just put down. It's not just misunderstood. It's illegal. People are being killed today somewhere in the world, in multiple places in the world, simply for their sexual preference, their proclivity. Nothing underage, nothing without consent, simply for liking same sex. Even for talking about it, or thinking about it, or intending to want to do it, that is enough in some countries to be imprisoned and or killed. And that's why we talk about it, because that's not cool. That's got nothing attached to human rights. Living
Right.
in Canada, we're so fortunate that we are evolved enough to accept people where they are and who they are. But
Yeah.
until it's that way everywhere, in 2024, we have dozens of countries that would rather kill you than accept you. That's why we talk about it. That's why we have parades.
That's a good answer because I think a lot of people want that answer, right? Like even me, I would say, look, I don't care if he's bi or not. Why would I care? And but for everybody that's like that, like I don't see his sexuality first, so I don't care. The people
Yeah.
that are the judgment, the people that are going to criminalize it, that's maybe why the book is there. Because hey, these are people, these real people. You're locking up or worse. Um, okay, I got another question for you, and I'm not going to
Tell
let you go
me,
because you got to answer this for me.
I'm good
Um,
for time, but if you go a little long, that's fine with me. You can edit
all
out
right.
long answers because I give you some of those.
Well, yeah, Andrew and I were discussing the book the first night we were trying to read it. I said, I'm not sure, but I think he just outed Abraham Lincoln. I mean, this is going to be a bumpy ride, man. I'll tell you that. This is going to be a bumpy ride. Okay, so you say one of the misconceptions of being bi is that people will say, "Well, I don't think they can be monogamous." And then people
Yeah.
challenge that. So here's my thing: I don't think that's true. I think if you choose to be, it's like being heterosexual. You can choose to be monogamous, or you can choose not to be monogamous. I've said I make a decision to be with this person. I now say no to the millions of other women lining up.
That are
I can't
lined
even,
up
I'm
to.
sorry, I couldn't even get through it without laughing. I imagine it's the same with being bi. However, here's my thing. I I go into my relationship with my wife knowing that while I may disappoint her on a number of levels, at least I feel like I can fulfill her on one level. If I'm with somebody who's bi, I know that if in order to be monogamous, I feel like they're shutting down an important part of who they are to be monogamous with me. And so I don't know if I could live with that. I don't want somebody to deny who they are to be with me and be in a monogamous relationship. So while I guess I agree on the surface, yeah, we can be monogamous. I need you to explain to me how would it work and for you to still be happy. Does
Well,
that make
yeah,
sense?
it's a great point. Um, Robin Oakes, who's one of my special guests in the book, who is a learned academic person in the northeast of the U.S., who's been speaking for a long time. She's kind of like America's foremost voice on bisexuality. She herself bisexual. She herself got married just after it was legal to get married in the state in which she comes from, and she's married to a woman. And she has chosen to be monogamous with that woman. It doesn't mean she's not still attracted to other people. No. Um, it comes down to a choice, doesn't it? You bring up a great question, and another guest in the book, Ray Sharazeski, speaks to relationship styles, monogamy versus consensual non-monogamy, gets into polyamory. Um, any any relationship is an agreement, largely. Um,
Fair.
how are we going to do this thing? Are we going to do it traditionally as the monogamists would see it? Or are we going to do it differently? What does it look like? What are the boundaries? What are the so-called rules? But boundaries is a better word. Where do we go here? And some people that are bi have decided that it's more important to have that one-on-one connection with somebody of a different sex than their own than it is to have the freedom to do what they want to do anytime they want to do it. It's a very individual thing. You can't throw a blanket over it and say it's this way or it's that way. It's up to the individual and the individual's partner to figure out how they're going to navigate it. For me, though, I'll be, because I don't want to be wishy-washy about who I am. For me, I do feel like it's shutting down a side of you. Um, Fluidity is something you brought up earlier. It's not always the same feeling. You don't wake up every day of the week feeling as strongly about your proclivity to one sex as you do the other. Some days it's really strong for both. Some days it's less strong for one or the other. Some days it's super strong for one or the other. For me personally, I never wanted to shut it down. So that comes into play with the discussion you have with the person you have a relationship with. So the relationships I've chosen to have in the last several years, since I've been completely honest about it with not only myself, but with them,
Right.
has been a different style of relationship than traditional monogamy. And that works for me. One of my big things, and this is a real nugget of information. One of the reasons I never really came clean back in the day was fear that nobody would want me. I always wanted a romantic relationship with a woman, and I had many, and I love it. I really enjoy being with a woman in the house, in a domestic setting, although I
Yeah.
still like to live alone. But, they come over to yours, you go over to theirs. I love that. The dinners, the movies, the hanging out on the couch, the having silly conversations, the making love, all of it. I love that with a woman. I never thought I would find one that would accept me as a bisexual man. So it took me forever to come to terms with being honest about it. And when I finally did, the thing that I realized that I never would have imagined, some women really like it. Some women really like it. They're like, no, I like that you're bi. I like that side of you. And I don't even mind that you exercise that. How are we going to go forward? How are we going to make it work?
Right.
I
And that
think that's
becomes the,
really when you get to true intimacy, is by being honest not only with yourself but with your partners as well too.
it's so important. You're
Yeah.
right. You're
I
right.
guess it's another thing you both have in common too, right? I mean, oddly enough, I don't say that to be light about it. I'm just saying it. There's an overlap now that you're like, yeah, this is cool too, and I'm into that, whatever. So
Yeah. Well, to go a step further than that, I made it sort of my MO to seek partners who are not only okay with me being bi and not shutting that down, but also themselves being bi. It just makes the understanding that much greater. And newsflash, there's a lot more people that are legitimately not only bi, that are identifying as such, but there's so many that aren't identifying and not open about it because maybe they don't have a platform and maybe they don't feel it's anybody else's business. But it's prevalent, as you guys are aware from the book, LGBTQ, the whole pride sort of spectrum, the pride flag. 60% of that is bisexual. There's a lot of people out there that are
Yeah.
even outside of that identification that are not so much struggling with it, but considering it or have it in them to be that way. Without the societal conditioning, the teachings of the church and the state that we've all grown up with, less so your sons, to your point, because they've had less of our baby boomer conditioning that came from the 40s and 50s into
right.
the 60s. And they're way more open. In fact, people that are younger are highly identifying as bisexual as compared to our aged people. My point was what? I think I lost it. I'm so sorry.
No, I don't think so. I think it all came out of Andrew's point of say, look, emotional honesty in intimacy is integral to the development of the relationship. And I think that's what you're exposing on, right? And how important that is.
I
So,
define intimacy as
yeah,
honesty first and foremost. Andrew
yeah.
had it exactly right.
So I was saving this for the wrap up comment, but I was going to ask you then because it just fits so well now. So you're happier now. than 10 years ago.
I'm the happiest I've ever been. Yeah, it's this the cruel thing about aging. You finally get to this point where you're, oh my God, I think I started to sort of figure things out. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm 60 or whatever. Like, how couldn't I have done this earlier? But I do think that reading books and being open to other opinions allows you to gain more knowledge and context sooner. So I encourage people to give the book a shot. And whether
Well,
they're
it's a
hetero,
great
you
time for the
know,
book, really.
it's a
Um,
good time for it, isn't
yeah,
it?
like, I mean, Canada is so far forward compared to other countries where you talk about dozens of countries where it's actually illegal. Here, it's accepted. Um, but you still have those people that, well, they might be having feelings. They're not ready to talk about it. And so your book really gives a platform. And,
Thank you.
you know, I like the way that you do the book as well, too. You come from a point that you're talking about statistics, but you've got really interesting guests on. You're not just talking about just being bi, but you're looking at the different ways of living, whether that's gay, that's lesbian, that you want to put on a dress and go out and perform show tunes. You cover all that, but you keep us enticed with those erotic stories
Well, that's
in
interesting,
between.
Andrew.
You,
Thank you.
you need
Yeah,
to
I
do
want
an audio version of it, just so that you
I,
can
I will.
haul people in.
I'd
That's
like
a
an
20.
audio version. He walks into the room and he puts down his pumpkin spice latte, saunters across the room. Look, I don't want to be a naysayer, guys, but both of you have said that Canada is very accepting. And I'll tell you this, I continually make the mistake of um, expanding what's going on here in Ontario and thinking it's the same all across the country. I do that all the time. Oh, we're getting ripped off at the gas pumps and it must be the same everywhere. And we're locked down for vaccinations and it's got to be the same in every province. And then I find out it is not. It is absolutely not. And I remember having a friend of mine in school who is gay, and we were in Toronto, and that poor guy grew up in Alberta. And he said, you grow up in beef eating cowboy country. That's not cool being gay. And
Yeah,
I want to just make the point, and this is, I guess I make the point only to point out the importance of the book, that while we are probably globally far ahead of many other countries, it doesn't mean that we're done. You
there
know,
are there are definitely geographical pockets even within Canada. I've not been to the territories, and I've not been to the Rock, Newfoundland, but I've been everywhere else in this country, mostly on motorbike, and lived in four provinces, and some of them multiple times. And I can tell you that everywhere you go, there are people who are completely accepting, and everywhere you go, there are people who are completely not. Be it Southern Alberta, be it Northern BC, be it right here in Southern Ontario, even in Toronto, we can't we can't generalize ever about who's in or on or cool and who's not. It's kind of goes back to what Andrew said earlier about it's no us and them. And I'm not, and Lance, you totally get it too. There's no us and them. It's one person at a time. How do you feel? And that's all we can do is have conversations with that one person, like we do on the radio, right? When I'm on the
right.
radio, I'm not saying good evening, Toronto. I'm just saying hi, how are you? This is one person at a time, and that's how we have to see the world. Politicians will see the world as this group of people or that group of people. One votes for them, one doesn't. They're trying to get the people that do vote for them to do that again, and the people that don't vote for them to vote for them for the first time. Because politicians' job is to continue to be a politician. Me, I just want to connect with somebody over something I care about. It's going to be music or it's going to be human rights.
Right. It's a shame that our politicians could not be the same guy. Like one and the same. I feel the same way sometimes. Like,
And some of them are. I mean, some of
yeah,
them really
can't generalize.
legitimately are, but a lot of them, it's easier to campaign with I don't know, a two by four than it is with something more subtle, which is why Trump got in. He campaigned with a two by four,
Yeah.
build the wall, immigrants suck, and they're giving trans operations in schools, like, lies.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Lies. You know those
If
things.
you tell a lie, like
Yeah.
somebody said, why didn't Kamala win the election in America? And my basic answer is this: he had a hit a louder bullhorn for a longer time. No matter what you say, if you say it loud and over time, you're going to convince people that you're the right idea. You've got the right idea. People were so confused about what was going on with hey, what happened to Biden and why is she in here? Can they even do that? There was confusion, brand confusion, for lack of a better,
Right.
There was a
and
large
then,
position a percentage that didn't even know Biden had dropped out.
exactly. And then bang, there's an election and then it's done. He had the bullhorn going for more than 8 years. He had it going for an entire career, on The Apprentice and as a TV guy. So you say something long enough, loud enough, whether it's true or not, it doesn't really matter, evidently.
I
But
like your explanation though, Jeff, because the other explanation for that really upsets me is that twice they've put forward educated, intelligent, competent women, and twice America has chosen, a sexual predator, convicted criminal guy,
I
and they've
completely
twice
agree.
done that. So I would rather hear your explanation than be faced with the absolute certainty that they are so misogynistic they couldn't handle a woman in the White House, and it drives me
Well,
absolutely
yeah,
batshit crazy.
that's a big one. Well, we've really come full circle because we talked about me not being ready to write the book until this year. Not ready until my dad had passed. I don't think America or a lot of so-called Western thinking countries are ready, not only for a woman to be a leader, but a woman of color.
Yeah, there'd
That's
be
a
that.
big one for a lot of people. They weren't
Sure.
even, they were barely ready for a man of color.
Right.
Um, I've, there's a lot there to unpack and conversation for another day. But I just say be kind to people, number one, and meet them where they are. And you don't have to agree with everything they say, but give them a chance, give them
I
an
love
ear.
that.
I think that was to my point of, look, if you don't have to be bi to get something out of Jeff's book. So if you're listening to this and thinking, I don't know if I relate to this book is interesting and it is about being kind. It's about being fair. It's, one by one, right? So
Thank you.
I would recommend if this isn't something that you would normally see and pick up, this is not a book for bisexuals. It's a book.
It's a
And,
book about better understanding
that's right.
people different from you. But you know what it turns out to be? It's a book about understanding yourself, too. It doesn't mean I'm suggesting you're all bi. It means I'm suggesting that there's things in there that might make you go, I hadn't considered that before. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it's available on Amazon, not only in ebook, but in print. And as much as I love traditional bookstores, uh, I can't have them all over the world. So you can get this book anywhere in the world now on Amazon.
Jeff does sprinkle a few eroticisms, poems, and stories through the book. So it's not a long read, but if you keep stopping to have cold showers, it does draw the book out a little bit. I got to be honest.
Those
So, but
stories,
that's
thank
about
you,
me. So,
Lance. And Andrew brought them up earlier. There are 9 erotic stories in the book, and the first one and the last one are strictly hetero. One's called Country Drive. It's about you and your significant other going for a drive in the country in a really cool car and what you get up to on that drive. And the other one is got a beach and a beach house and a sailing club and a younger guy and an older woman, and they're completely hetero. So, and then the other 7 are just completely filthy. And I say, and
there
I
you
say
go.
that in a good way.
More than
Yeah.
once, I had to take a knee and have an orange. Yeah, just to survive.
What? Have a what?
Have an orange slice.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Have an orange slice.
Sorry. I thought we were being metaphorical. I was like, what? Well, I'm sorry.
I don't like
Dude, come on now.
Oh,
I knew it was
Anyway.
working. It turned me on to write it, so I think it might turn you on to read it.
that's awesome.
You know what? And that's cool. I like that. I might put that in the song. It turned me on to write it. Might turn you on to read it. I don't know. And once again, draw people's attention to if you find yourself in a library wearing a dress, don't focus on the fact you're wearing a dress. Focus on the fact you're in a library and you're
There,
reading.
I
Good
love
for
that.
you.
I'm going to start using that.
Jeff, we wrap these things up by something incredibly unscientific. It's called a lightning round. And we ask you quick questions and you need quick answers. And they're not hard answers. So it would be like, Jeff, shoes or boots?
Boots.
There you go, because he's a motorcycle driving guy. So right. Andrew puts these things together. He's brilliant at it. I love it. Andrew, take it away. It's a very unscientific way. We get to
I only give the answer. I don't have no explanation, just the answer.
You know what? A lot of times there are explanations, but the idea is just to give the answer.
If you struggle to give the answer and you need to explain why,
then please do.
Expand. People with annoying voices, we just the answer. But with Jeff, he can draw us a picture. Go
I'll
ahead.
be honest. In the 4 years that we've been doing these interviews, I think only once we've gotten through with somebody actually just giving the answer. So that kind
it's not so much lightning in that respect.
No, exactly. So let's start this off. Sure. Let's start this off. Book or e-reader?
Book, hardcover book.
Okay. Stadium concert or honky tonk bar?
Bar.
Classic rock or folk?
Classic rock.
Nice. Terrestrial radio or satellite radio?
I do both often. So I can't pick one. I can't.
Oh, we got a man down, ladies and gentlemen. The synapses are happening. It's an aneurysm.
Okay. Carnegie Hall or the Sphere?
Carnegie Hall.
How does one get to Carnegie Hall?
Practice.
Yes, you do. Massive Attack or Peaches?
Oh, God, that's so close. I'm going to go Massive Attack right now because I listened to 72 Massive Attack songs already this week. And I love Peaches. Yeah.
Wow.
On shuffle. I love Massive Attack.
Awesome.
You might want to go caffeine free, my friend. Holy crap.
Okay. Cafe Racer or Adventure Bike?
Adventure
bike. I wasn't sure which way you're going to go there because I mean,
I've had the adventure bike, the Neil Peart bike.
Nice. Big city, small town.
Small town.
Your 30s or your 50s?
Your 50s for sure.
And last but not least, naked news or naked lunch?
Naked news, because my friend Laura Desiree is a special guest in the book, and she was a host on Naked News, and she's so smart and sexy.
And that has been another episode of Backstage Lowdown.
Jeff,
it's been awesome, guys.
Man. We can't thank you enough.
I looked forward to it, and it met my expectations. So thank you.
Oh, good. We were both excited to have you and wanted to do a good job, for the podcast, but for you as well, because we both think you're, the best at what you do. So
you're both very kind and enlightened, and you were prepared, and I just had a good time. And thank you.
Awesome.
What? We're gonna get that coffee this summer up in Blue.
Please do come. You're welcome. Yeah. Come right to the house.